Few surprises and no leadership reshuffle in Egypt's ruling party's annual conference. 79-year-old President Hosni Mubarak, re-elected as party head, urged his government to do more to help the country's poor. Can he deliver results, and is he priming his son for the top job? This is Inside Story. I'm Imran Garda. The Egyptian National Democratic Party conference was concluded with more promises to help the underprivileged and the poor. Yet bridging the gap between the promises made at the conference and people's expectations could prove elusive. A large part of Egypt's population, almost 30 million people, lives below the poverty line. Hugo McPherson has this report.
At first glance, Egypt is moving forward. The International Monetary Fund says the country's economic revival has hit new highs. At 7% growth, Egypt now rivals India and China this year. But there's a sense of disappointment among ordinary Egyptians who feel government promises of reform are merely a sham. There were more promises this week at the ruling National Democratic Party conference. On the agenda, democratic reform and economic revival. But Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak attempted to address Egypt's gap between rich and poor too.
Social justice is a basic tenet of our public policy. Justice is the thing that spreads the fruits of growth and development. It is a justice that underlines the joint efforts of the sons of one nation.
On everyone's minds, but not discussed, was the question, who will succeed the 79-year-old president? Widely expected to succeed his father is 43-year-old Jamal Mubarak.
I am focused, I have a mandate, I have a responsibility. So we need to move from where we are today in the issues of local government to a much more decentralized system. Our party, working with our government, can deliver on our election promises that were laid out back in 2005.
Speaking in English, he presented himself as a confident candidate to the world. The view from within the country is that it's still divided. The rich ride the economic highs, while the poor still struggle to make ends meet. And despite government promises and IMF estimates, that gap is widening.
Hugo McPherson there. Now talking to Egyptians on the streets of Cairo, this is what they had to say about the ruling party's conference.
For the last 27 years, they have been making these promises. The program presented by the president promised so much, but none of it has been implemented.
There's development in the country. We cannot deny that, but there's a lot of negative sides as well.
I hope, but I'm not optimistic.
I'm ready to vote him president, but let him tell me what he has achieved.
We have witnessed a leap forward during Mubarak's rule. We hope that Gamal Mubarak will follow his father's footsteps.
These are just slogans. The reality for us, the young people, is different.
Good words but no actions. We've heard all this for years and nothing's changed.
The party doesn't help the poor now, but I think they will have to try.
Well, joining us to discuss the outcome of the Egyptian ruling party conference are our guests in Cairo, Hassan Al-Hayawan, Professor of Business Administration at Ain Shams University and a member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Also in Cairo, Hussam Bahgat, Director of the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. And in Washington, D.C., Amr Hamzawi, Senior Researcher at the Carnegie Endowment. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. Hamzawi, if I could start off with you first. Are we witnessing some sort of unfolding of a dynastic inheritance?
To an extent, yes. The ruling establishment in Egypt has been grooming Gamal Mubarak to become the successor in spite of different denials by leading figures of the National Democratic Party as well as of the Egyptian government throughout the last 2 to 3 years. Gamal Mubarak has been promoted systematically over the last years. He's now one of the leading figures of the party. His group is very influential. His group is well represented in the Egyptian cabinet, and they have been running the two most significant files in Egypt as of now. One is economic development, and two, political reforms, or what they claim to be political reforms. So yes, to an extent, we are witnessing an Egyptian path toward a dynastic republic that has been unfolding over the last 2 to 3 years.
Hussam Bahgat, Hosni Mubarak had emphasized social justice and economic revival for the poor. Is there any substance to that promise?
I don't think so, and I think the majority of people who have been hearing such promises for a very long time disagree as well. If you take, for example, one major item in the president's electoral platform from 2005, which was widely raised and discussed in this year's convention, the introduction of a new national health insurance law, for example. If you look at the substance of this bill, which introduces the most drastic, the most radical changes in the healthcare system in the country since the 1960s. Clearly, this is a law that does not really have the poor and the needy and the economically disadvantaged in mind. This is an implementation of the World Bank's recipe, and clearly it is presented only to maximize the role played by the private sector in providing healthcare without much consideration given to the needs of the majority of the people who, as you said, remain to be living under the poverty line. So we don't think that even at the much celebrated economic reforms that the president and his government and his party are introducing to people inside and outside Egypt, we don't think that people have much faith in this.
Hassan Al-Hayawan, do you agree? Many people will be asking, why has inflation only gotten worse and the gap between rich and poor only seems to be widening?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd like to point that I beg to differ with both guests about what they mentioned. But when you talk about inflation and the gap between the poor and the rich, I mean, this is what we call a normal outcome of economic reform, because what we are witnessing now is what we call a transitional period, and all the economic reform which is going now in Egypt has some negative impact. Everybody knows that. And if we go back in 1997, when the Asian crisis started, Egypt went through like 5 years of total recession. And anybody knows that if 1 year of recession needs 2 to 3 years for recovery. So now we are recovering from the negative impact of what happened in 1997. And this gap actually is normal, but the point is that I believe that the National Democratic Party and the government and what the president said about social justice is a very important element in the policies of the government in this near future. So it's normal to have poor and rich in any country, but the idea of ignoring this is the mistake. If you are focusing on it and you have policies and you have what we call systems that can provide basic services to the public, quality basic service to the public, this is what we call social justice.
Amr Hamzawi, let's talk democracy. Do you think this regime will ever allow an open contest on a level playing field?
No, not at all. And in fact, here we have to look at the track record of the National Democratic Party and of the Egyptian government, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. And even if we look at 2005, the year where we did have parliamentary and presidential elections, multi-candidate presidential elections, and to an extent pluralist parliamentary elections, at the end of the day, the National Democratic Party and the government managed to run the scene in the usual authoritarian way, pushing aside opposition movements, repressing the one movement which made it in an impressive way to the parliament, the Muslim Brotherhood. So we are not really entering into a new era era of political dynamism that might lead to democratic transition. And the same applies to economic development and social justice. It would be good to imagine the National Democratic Party and the government and the presidency focusing on issues pertaining to social justice. But the track record has been far away from it. And in fact, the very alliance which sustains the Egyptian government, an alliance between the military establishment, security services, the NDP, and leading figures of the business community, I guess if you look at it, this alliance does not have much interest in promoting social justice in a structural way in Egypt to address issues like poverty, unemployment, lack of decent living conditions for a clear majority of Egyptians.
Hossam Bahgat, do you think that the pressure from the US for democratic reform has lessened since Hamas's victory in Gaza in 2006? Has this maybe bought Hosni Mubarak more time?
Yes, and I mean, I think even the U.S. administration, many of its officials already admit this, but perhaps Amr Hamzawi is in a better position to address this question than I. But I know that as a domestic human rights activist on the ground, clearly there was no difference even before the current U.S. president. I mean, we are used to the same statements, but then when it comes to business, Egypt is a major player in the region, and the U.S. needs Egypt, and there's only so much that they can do for pushing democratic reforms on the ground. And we have we have learned not to expect much from U.S. pressure, but we know that that domestically, at least on the ground, the government of President Mubarak bought time during 2004 and 2005 when political reform was on vogue, and then since 2006 we have been witnessing a serious crackdown, not only a return to the old practices of the government after 1 year, the year 2005, of relative openness, but even further deterioration. And,
all right, let's bring Amr Hamzawi in here. Amr Hamzawi, what do you think of that? What do you think of the US influence? Do you think that they're turning a blind eye to Mubarak's excesses? Hosni Mubarak said on Tuesday that he opposes any interference in his country's affairs from abroad, obviously referring to the United States. Do you believe him?
What President Mubarak said 2 days ago in the NDP convention has been part of the official rhetoric coming out of Cairo throughout the last years, which is a rhetoric of national sovereignty and no foreign interference in domestic affairs. But at the end of the day, and if we just compare 2005 and 2006, in 2005 the US administration did focus and did pay attention to domestic developments in Egypt and pressured the regime to open up to an extent. This was one factor among many factors, primarily domestic factors, but it added to the dynamism and the relative opens which Hossam just mentioned. In 2006, and with the changing conditions in the region, with the need of the US to secure the help of the Egyptian regime with regard to Iraq and running the Israeli-Palestinian issue and running the Lebanese case, the Bush administration started to turn a blind eye at the rhetorical level as well as the level of policy and action. And this enabled the regime, again, as one of the factors, enabled the regime in Egypt to turn against the political dynamism of 2005 and to unleash a wave of repression against opposition movements, primarily the Muslim Brotherhood, but by no means restricted to that.
All right.
So yes,
I want to get Hassan Al-Hayawan to ask his opinion on this. What do you make of that, Mr. Al-Hayawan?
Can I? Yes, I think one thing I want to mention is that I myself don't accept at any rate the interference of the states in our internal affairs. I mean, this is as a given for me. So the rhetoric of speaking about the pressure and Egypt and then the blind eye because Egypt is helping in Iraq or Israel or whatever, this I think is total misconception. And I hate the idea of someone living in Washington and then criticizing the system and telling all his opinion regardless of what is the real happening in the grounds. I know that Egypt is trying, the system, the regime is trying hard to implement democracy, but it takes time. And you have to understand that national security is a very important issue. You have to understand that terror is there everywhere in the region. So there's the steps we are taking to democracy actually may be a little bit slow, but at the end we are on the right track. So
all right, gentlemen. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Al Hayawan. We have to take a break. Time for a short break now. When we come back, we look further into social injustice and the widening gap between classes in Egypt. Do stay with us.